Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, it's time for another edition of the MMA Outsiders. We had a lot of action this past weekend at UFC Austin. We got a lot of action coming up. And we're finally here. It's December. It's time for a lot of the end of the year madness that awaits us. And I can't wait. We got 2 UFC cards to go. We got a couple more big boxing cards to go. It's going to be a fun, thrilling ride as we're on the downward trend right now. We are about to pull into the station for the end of 2023, the start of 2024.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess you could make an analogy to that. We're about to pull into MMA's version of the North Pole, if you will. We're getting close.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get to the holidays, obviously we got a lot of action still left to go. We'll discuss UFC Austin today. We'll discuss Dana White's comments about the PFL-Bellator deal. We'll talk some boxing, including a super lightweight title fight coming up between Devin Haney and Regis Prograis. Devin Haney's return, his first fight since the controversial win over Vasily Lomachenko. We got a UFC Vegas card, our last Apex card of the year, Zain. Oh no, we gotta wait several weeks before we get back to the Apex. Oh, and then we got the PFL. Then we got the PFL European Championships. Losene Keita, our old friend, we're gonna be discussing about his return to the cage. A lot to get into. Before we do, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network. Make sure to follow us across social media on Facebook, Instagram, and the former Twitter, now X, at MMA Outsiders ETB. You can follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at ETB Network. To my right is Zain Bando, as always, my beloved co-host, the staff writer of BJPen.com, MMA Knockout. You can find his work on social media. You can follow him at ZainBando99. And I'm Tom Albano, a contributor to MMA News, contributor to Fansided MMA, and contributor to the PFL. And I will be busy with the PFL website this weekend as we close out 2023 with the European Championships. You can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. All right, Zain. Let's just get right into it. UFC Austin. Zain, I know we had a conversation, at least I had a conversation with some others about, hey, we're going to start doing some of our end of the year awards early, like starting to plan out, what all the media outlets, I should say, starting to plan out, what award is going to go to who. And I have mentioned that, at least to one party, that it's kind of dangerous to do that at the start of December. It's understandable to kind of get your, stuff in order. But considering, we still had plenty of action left to go. And, well, UFC Austin kind of proved why sometimes you really have to wait for certain things to play out in December. I mean, we've seen December come up with some great moments that kind of put a change in plans for end of the year awards. You think back to Cub Swanson versus Duo Choi in 2016. You think of Francis Ngannou's knockout of Alistair Overeem in 2017, which, Zain, you were there for at the Little Caesars Arena that December 2017 night.
I sure was, and for those who don't remember, that was a huge coming out party for Francis Ngannou, and that was one of those knockouts. Whether you were live in the arena or you were at home watching on TV, you all thought the same thing, that might be the scariest dude on the planet. And look at, who Francis Ngannou has become, and what a big, not just combat sports star he's become, but what a big global superstar he's become. And I've seen a lot of crazy knockouts in person. I don't think I've seen one as devastating and as shocking as that one. That's one that's ingrained in my memory, or will be ingrained in my memory for as long as I live. One of the most impressive and just stunning finishes you'll ever see, especially beating a legend like Overeem in that fashion. A version of Overeem that was still one of the best heavyweights in the world at the time. And yeah, as you alluded to, usually every year December brings you some moments you least expect, and to kind of transition into the UFC Fight Night card that was this past weekend from the Moody Center. I think it had all that and more, including a massive upset in the main event. I don't think anybody called this. I said Tarzukian would win this fight a week ago, and I was correct. Unfortunately for me, I went 5-7 on the night. It was one of my rougher prediction sprees for a UFC event. It was pretty disappointing to watch how many predictions I got wrong on this card, just because sometimes the unpredictability of MMA is what it is. But I did not get this one wrong. Arman Tarzukian, 64 seconds, knocking out Beneil Dariush, what is now back-to-back losses for Dariush. Honestly, a dominant win for Tarzukian, and a win that he absolutely needed to catapult himself into being a top contender in a very stacked lightweight division. And one of those wins where you'll never forget it. Similar to what I just alluded to. I mean, the way he finished Dariush is only something that, from my recollection, Charles Oliveira has ever done to him. And I just want to know from your perspective, we've watched Tarzukian for a long time. He's been in some wars, he's been in some controversial decisions, but you've never seen, at least so far in his UFC career, at least for me, I've never seen Tarzukian look at that impressive, even though it took a little over a minute to do so. What did you think of the fight, and did you think that in any sort of way Dariush was caught off guard? Because to me, it seemed like it.
I mean, who wasn't caught off guard, Zan? Who wasn't caught off guard by Arman Tsarukyan, the kind of performance that you had? As you kind of said, I don't think, we both called that Tsarukyan was going to win this fight. I don't think we had it that it was going to be in 64 seconds. I don't think we had it that it was going to be a knee followed by a right hand that drops Dariush out cold. None of us, I don't think anybody here had the expectation it was going to be that quick, that emphatic. And for Tsarukyan, it's a fantastic win. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's back-to-back losses for Dariush now, and he will have to have a rebound win at some point. But it's Charles Oliveira and now Arman Tsarukyan who is going to be jumping into the top 5 with a win like this. So those aren't bad losses for Dariush. He's just gonna have to, it's gonna have to be back to the drawing board in 2024 with him. But for Tsarukyan, I mean, it's a world of possibility now. And Dana even mentioned at the post-fight press conference, Dan, that he thinks that the plans, the expectation of Makhachev versus Oliveira 2 might have been shaken up by the way that Tsarukyan dominated this fight.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree there. I think he needs one more fight against a former champion or a former title challenger to stake his case. It's no disrespect to Beneil Dariush, but Beneil Dariush, as I alluded to, lost to Charles Oliveira and beat an aging Tony Ferguson. So to me, I don't think he should be calling for a title shot for Arman yet, but definitely if he wins one more fight, I think you could definitely see him jump right into that number one contender spot in it's late 2024, but calling for a title shot now to me is just a little bit too early.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like Arman Tsarukyan, you said it best. One more fight because, as you kind of mentioned, he needs that one win. He needs one win over one of these top 5 talents. A win over a Chandler, a Gagey, a Poirier. He needs a win over them, and then I think you can do this fight. And even if you think Tsarukyan is ready now, I don't think that's necessarily fair to Charles Oliveira, who has definitely earned a rematch with Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title that he technically never lost, in the cage. He lost it on the scales. Obviously, Islam beat him in the cage for a vacant title, but I just feel like you got to give Oliveira his fair shot at a rematch.
Yeah, I think the most logical step up for Tarzukian next is Dustin Poirier. If that's it, that's at least what I would do next, because Dustin Poirier's been in big fights before, and for Tarzukian, that would be the biggest name he's ever fought. For Beneil Dariush at the moment, given the landscape of the division, I don't entirely know. I think you have to see some of these fights play out in the top 6 before you can really start to talk about what a return fight for Dariush could look like, and what will be, no matter who he fights, an absolute must win, given that he has not had a very successful 2023 and could not bounce back after losing to a former champion in Oliveira that rightfully so deserves a rematch and is just kind of waiting on it at this point. So definitely a very interesting win for Tarzukian, and definitely a major shakeup in what is arguably the most exciting division in the sport. So congratulations to Tarzukian, and for Derry, who she really needs to go back to the drawing board, figure out what went wrong, and see what's next.
For sure. And then we go into the co-main event. Zain, there was a big lightweight fight in the co-main event, still within the top 15, towards the bottom end of it, in which Jalen Turner, brutal finish of Bobby Green. Obviously, there was a lot of hype train going on with Bobby Green, but Turner had some hype in himself, and now I'd say Jalen Turner could probably find his way into the top 10 by the time this episode goes up, if not just outside of it, going to be fighting a top 10 fighter next. But I feel like the bigger story here is Kerry Hatley, because it was it, and I have nothing personal against Kerry Hatley, but this was just a really, really bad, really late stoppage. I think it was stopped like 10 or 15 seconds after it should have been. I think he took like 10 or so more punches than he should have been. The Bobby Green just didn't deserve the kind of punishment, the additional punishment that he ate. It was unnecessary.
Yeah, definitely brutal, and you know, one of those stoppages where I think everyone had the same reaction, and I personally think, and I'm not trying to sympathize for him, but I just think it was one of those things where it was a lack of awareness. I mean, sometimes referees make mistakes and then they make excuses about it. You have not seen Kerry Hatley come out and defend the stoppage in any sort of way. Dana White even hinted at the post-fight press conference Saturday night at the conclusion of the event that Hatley did feel remorse, and that if he were to do it all over again, he would have stopped the fight sooner. There's obviously no way to prove that there's obviously no way to prove that is 100% true. But I do think in some instances you'll see referees, coming out and trying to justify their stoppages, i.e. Steve Mazzagatti after Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir, and Mario Yamasaki after Valentina Shevchenko's brutal win against Priscilla Cachoeira in 2017. Wouldn't see Kerry Hatley coming out and doing the equivalent of that. So I think in this instance, while the stoppage was bad, at least you can give Kerry Hatley a little bit of a break, given that he's definitely a veteran referee. He's been around the sport in the UFC for quite some time. I even think back in the early old Zuffa days, he used to have UFC fights before. So he's been in this position for a while, and I just think it's one of those fights where he probably regrets it. He probably wants to have it back, but not to take anything away from the performance, this is the best I've ever seen Jalen Turner. And simply put, I just think Bobby Green got caught. That was going to turn into a very exciting fight before the finish happened. And I think that if Bobby Green doesn't get caught, I think Green neutralizes his wrestling, kind of like what I said on the preview last week. If he was able to utilize his wrestling, he would have won the fight. But sometimes when you stand with someone for too long, you're going to get caught, and that's exactly what Turner did. So overall, very impressive performance for Turner, and this is just one of those fights for Bobby Green where he needs to go back to the drawing board. He needs to figure out what went wrong. He's going to protect his chin a little bit more, and once he does that, and I think he'll be back to his old self. He's one of the most exciting fighters in that division, and still someone that I'm sure the UFC would love to keep around for as long as they can.
Yeah, and I think to Jalen Turner, like you said, best performance he's had. I think, I think back to the first time I was really paying attention to him, to around the end of 2018, start of 2019. I was thinking, all right, this could go either way. This could be a guy who just, by the end of the year, probably gone from the UFC, or somebody who starts to make a name for himself, and he ends up being the latter. And now here he is about to enter 2024, and he's got to be fighting a top 10 fighter next at this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it. You could put him against a top 10 fighter. You could have him open a pay-per-view. You could have him headline a fight night. There's multiple different ways to use him, but definitely he's someone that's going to be in the top 10 in a major player at 155 as 2024 gets underway in a couple of weeks, and someone to definitely keep an eye on as a future title challenger, that's for sure.
And then, of course, right before Jalen Turner and his finish, we had Davison Figueiredo, the former flyweight champ, making his bantamweight debut. Figueiredo, obviously somebody else who isn't been known for causing some little mayhem to the end of the year awards of a big win a big fight in December with he and Moreno in 2020. But now his rivalry with Moreno over, he moves up to 135, takes on a really tough fighter in Rob Font. Excellent fight. Figueiredo gets the decision win, and Zain Figueiredo's for real at 135, and you have to expect that maybe with one more win, he's going to be right up there with the possibility of challenging O'Malley at some point in 24.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is definitely Davidson Figueiredo's permanent weight class, at least for the time being, and beating someone like Rob Font that's been in title contention for quite some time. He's kind of one of those fighters where, you know, he's in AAA and he's in the minors, but he just can't get to the big leagues. It seems like every single time Rob Font is put into a big fight or a big situation, he comes up a little bit short. And I thought that this was going to be the fight that he broke through, and I was clearly wrong about that. And Figueiredo obviously has championship experience with those words with Moreno. He was one of the most dominant flyweights in the world just a couple of years ago, and it goes to show that former championship experience, regardless of weight class, is experience. Figueiredo showed that, and yeah, could he have done a little bit better? Could he have not, kept it a close fight through 2 rounds with Font? Sure, but a win is a win. He still is a former champion. He's still in that mix. And, bantamweight needing fresh faces, is given the fact that, there was that whole carousel with Sterling and Jan a couple years ago. I think this was a nice shakeup to the division and a very solid win against a tough guy that, brings, a pedigree obviously out of a great camp in the New England cartel. And he just has, a dominant boxing base. And it seems like, Figueiredo was able to exploit all of that. So it was definitely a good performance. As I said, could have been a little bit better, but definitely someone that will stick and, be in the mix in that title picture as 2024 moves on. And as the impending Sean O'Malley, Cheeto Vera fight happens in a couple of months, I think it'll get a lot more clarity to 135. And we'll see, as Dana White likes to say, where Figueiredo fits into this whole puzzle, if you will.
For sure. Here's my question, Sam. Based on everything that was going on with lightweight, based on everything that's going on with Figueiredo, where does Kevin Lee fit into all of this?
That's a good one. It's a good one. We needed at least one of those rights. Where you go, anybody that was looking for your Kevin Lee reference on this episode, you got it. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Kevin Lee being mentioned at the end of 2023. You're right. I mean, it definitely could have been a better performance, but I feel like you said, Rob Font is a very tough fighter, and we talked about it last week. When these former champions, these stars of one division move up to another, Dana doesn't hold back. He will give somebody moving into another division a tough fight, a tough challenge to see if they can hang. And well, Figueiredo can definitely hang. And like you said, we'll see what else happens with the rest of the bantamweight division. Like you mentioned, probably not going to get too much clarity on this until after UFC 299 in March, when O'Malley and Cheeto Vera had their rematch for the bantamweight title. Zain, I would be remiss, though, if we did not make mention of the history that happened at UFC Austin. This was definitely, Zain, a card of the year contender. This is as close. UFC Austin, the last fight night at least the last fight night that took place in the city, the last ESPN television card for 2023, I think has to be up there with 290, 291, 292, the big summer that the UFC had as the potential card of year contender. Between those performances, some other performances, Miesha Tate closing out the prelims with a big win, and 8 performance of the night bonuses handed out by Dana White, plus a fight of the night. So 10 bonuses handed out, $500,000 in bonus cash handed out in this card, including Jakar Close, Cody Brundage during the preliminary card, both winning their fights with first-round slam knockouts, both countering submissions, one countering a triangle choke, the other countering, I think it was a triangle armbar, and slamming their opponents on their heads, knocking them out cold. Never, it was the 13th and 14th slam knockout in UFC history. Obviously, we have seen the little history of slam knockouts in the octagon. You think of Matt Hughes' knockout, the controversial knockout of Carlos Newton. You think of Evan Tanner getting slammed into unconsciousness by Tito Ortiz. You think of Rose Namajunas getting slammed, getting basically pile driven on her head in her fight with Jessica Andrade, in which Andrade won the strawweight title. But now here, 13th, 14th slam knockouts in UFC history. Never before have there been two slam KOs on the same card, let alone just the fact that they were back-to-back fights. It's unbelievable. That this just goes to show you how awesome of a card UFC Austin was.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back slam knockouts for sure, and you could argue that once the Jakara close win happened, you said there's nothing that could top the close slam knockout, and then of course you have Brundage's. I think both of them were just as nasty, or if not Brundage's being a little bit nastier than closest. But I think it's one of those things where you never know, it just goes to show you those literal two examples. You do not have a submission until you actually have one. And in these two instances, both guys were able to get out of the submission and then some. They won the fight off it. And, it just goes to show that the unpredictability of the sport is insane. This is why, for the people who go to events, this is why for the Twitter crowd, for those of you who know MMA Twitter well enough, they say, "Where's my prelim gang at?" Well, this is partially the reason, because you don't know what's going to happen in literally every single fight. And in these two instances, you get two of the most shocking results to two fights that people have seen all year, from guys that, I'm just going to be honest with you. It's not a knock on either of them, but, these are coming from two guys who, have slowly but surely and continue to work their way up and have not, really reached a casual audience base yet. I think these two performances definitely did that and a whole lot more, considering their viral ability. And I think that next year, if both these two stay on the trajectory that they're on, I think some heads are going to turn. And definitely the Austin crowd was treated to two of the best finishes I'm sure that people in that arena have ever seen, let alone just two of the best finishes in the history of the sport, not just 2023, because you think I know where I'm going with this. I think these two finishes are two of the most viral finishes we've seen this year, if not the nastiest. So you got to give a shout out to both of them. And this is why, again, you never know if you have a submission until you have it. And these two certainly proved just that and a whole lot more, and definitely two massive wins for both of them.
And it definitely proves why, you never know with some of these cards, because you could have written. I thought UFC Austin was an excellent fight night going into it. I thought it had some decent hype and such, but I know some who will only, tune into the UFC pay-per-views, but this is why you never know with this sport. This was an absolutely fantastic card, and shout out to the UFC for a fantastic, as I said, final UFC on ESPN pay-per-view. I mean, UFC on ESPN television card for 2023. Obviously, this coming weekend, Vegas 83 is going to be the last ESPN Plus exclusive. Next week with UFC 296, it's the last pay-per-view card and the last UFC card of 2023. So we'll discuss all of that and more. We'll discuss Vegas 83's main event a little later. But Zain, I want to also bring your attention to something that happened at the post-fight press conference. So one of the reporters asked Dana his honest thoughts about the PFL-Bellator merger. And this is literally his full quote here. One bleepy organization that sells no tickets and nobody watches buys another bleepy organization that sells no tickets and nobody watches. And he was being very sarcastic in his remarks, saying, good job. This sounds like a real winner to me. What are your thoughts on Dana's sarcasm?
Well, before I even get into that, one thing we forgot to mention in the last segment of the Amazement of the Slams is that, Tom, I don't know if you realize this, this was the highest grossing U.S. fight night card in the history of the UFC. If you who would have told me a few months ago that the Moody Center of all places, the home of the Texas Longhorns, would have the biggest gate in the history of UFC fight nights, which I didn't even really know was a category that the UFC considered. I would have been very perplexed. Not to mention the gate was $2.4 million, which is unbelievable to me. So overall, the success of UFC Austin is going to be lived for years to come. But back to the situation in the end. Yeah, there you go. I mean, all the money that's going to get made from that is absurd. Anyway, back to the quote at hand here.
Sorry to interrupt, but just thinking about it. I mean, yeah, you're right. You would expect it to be the Moody Center, but you know what? Everything's bigger in Texas, especially those Cowboys. Jerry, what are you doing here?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, you would think, given that it was Texas, that we'd have some really bad judging, and unfortunately, we avoided that. We avoided at this time. There's some cities and states that you're kind of wary of when it comes to judges' scorecards, but this one actually wasn't bad. Oh, it was quite a surprise. Anyway, back to the quote at hand here. Just want to give a shout out to this reporter. No one's been able to figure out what his name is yet. He asked like 5 good questions of Dana at the press conference, and they were all in like a 3 to 4 minute exchange, and I think it really got Dana riled up. But this first one, we got him riled up. This isn't a surprise. I think Dana knows that Don Davis is on his tail, and I think that Dana knows that Don Davis is starting to talk, and Don Davis is starting to say that they have the roster equal to the UFC, and this is Dana's way of firing back and trying to defend his promotion instead of giving credit where credit is due. Although he did at the very beginning, this is the part of the quote that we left out because initially, he just said best of luck to him and whatever. But then he goes into this. All I gotta say is this is not a surprise. It's obvious that he's somewhat nervous that the PFL can sort of put a leverage point on the UFC to where they're going to have to compete against one another, or maybe he doesn't think that. But from the way he was chagrining and the way he was just grilling this reporter with this reply, makes me believe that he was infuriated that even a question remotely as important as two of the biggest MMA promotions below the UFC being acquired was going to be a question. I'm surprised, to be quite frank, that this wasn't going to be asked of him. So I think that in this sense, I do think he handled it in a bit of an unprofessional way, and he put it back on trying to say how great the UFC was instead of just simply acknowledging, this is good. I like competition. Let's see what we can do. And then he proceeds to trash on them, and then he proceeds to not even address the fact whether or not Michael Venom Page is signed to the UFC or it isn't. There was a week that Michael Venom Page he'd be fighting in the UFC according to shots in the War Room during the Full Send podcast and stuff. So, I don't know what to think of it. All I know is that this is just Dana being Dana, and that's really it. So,
yeah, you're pretty much right there. It really is Dana being Dana. I'm not surprised he has a response like this. I mean, listen, is the UFC the number one promotion undisputed in the world? Yes. I mean, PFL still has more to prove. Bellator obviously is now under PFL rules, so PFL slips into the number 2 slot. One championship barely did any MMA this year, to the point where I'm not going to name names, but I know of at least one media outlet saying that basically is not going to put any one fights on its end of the year awards because they just focus so much more on Muay Thai and kickboxing this year. They were barely they were barely an MMA organization. Also considering Zain, Mike's comments from last week to Ariel Helwani, where he kind of implied that there's a chance by the end of 24, maybe into 25, one championship could be on some financial straits after, not getting their money's worth for the free agency spending that they did at the end of the 20 teens. So obviously UFC is at this point number 1 in the world. But you're right. I wish he could have given a little more credit where it's due. I did like, by the way, you mentioned Don Davis. You sent this to me from his Twitter, the little response that he had about first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, the Gandhi quote. I thought that was fantastic. I think we're going to see a lot of good verbal sparring over the next year plus with Dana and with Don Davis. That should be a hell of a lot of fun. And then you also consider, like you said, it's the two promotions under the UFC merging into one. Obviously, Dana was harping about, TV, the ticket sales. And yeah, there is some more that needs to be done there. Some people want production and rule sets for PFL to change. But here's my thing, Zan. I I find it kind of, I don't want to say brazen. I mean, maybe brazen's right, or I don't know. But I just find it kind of funny. Dana's saying this. And, maybe he doesn't have to be worried about PFL and Bellator merging. But you know what he does have to worry about, Sam? That antitrust lawsuit that's now pretty much, that's been certified and is going to be going into trial in 24.
Well, yeah, he has to worry about that, number one, and he has to also worry about what he can and can't say, because whatever he says that is technically in the lawsuit could be used against him. So he has to choose his words carefully, so to speak, and that's probably something that's easier said than done. And I'm sure that that's one of those responses that this is just a theory. I don't know this for a fact, but when someone probably told him to say a version of this so that the UFC wouldn't even get more pushback. So we'll see. We'll see. I mean, and really, the whole thing about this that's kind of interesting is, to be quite honest with you, if I'm him, I don't even know why I would even comment on this, considering that they are head and shoulders above both of those organizations combined. And if he really thinks that he has a better roster than the PFL, he would have just admitted it. He would have just admitted that at the press conference instead of trying to crap all over them. But toodaloo to him, I guess, and he's going to do what he's going to do anyway. And what I think is going to be interesting next year, though, and something that I think people are not anticipating, but I am. I think one way or another, Don Davis is going to force the UFC to cave in. I think there is going to be a cross promotional show at some point in the next 2 years. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know where it's going to be. I don't know when it's going to be, but something tells me that Don Davis is going to pull as many strings as he possibly can to try to gain leverage and see if he can put his PFL fighters up against his UFC fighters. And I'm going to proclaim that at least in 2 years, we are going to know who is the better roster, the PFL or the UFC, and then people can start debating till the end of time. But I think that this war of verbal words on social media is far from over, and as you alluded to, it's definitely getting more fun by the day for sure.
I don't know, Zed, if Dana would be willing to do such a thing. I mean, he was very, he did it with Pride when Chuck Liddell went over to Pride for the Total Elimination 2003 in the middleweight Grand Prix tournament, where Chuck Liddell lost to Rampage Jackson. And then he didn't want to do anything like that again. Then Connor does the whole crossover fight with Floyd. I just don't know. Don Davis is going to have to really get under Dana's skin for him to do something like that. I really think that he's going to have to do something extreme.
Oh, I think I think so too. It's just a matter of who, what, and when, and that's gonna be what's anticipated. And also, it's gonna be interesting to see, if the UFC, like I alluded to, is gonna try to block the PFL from doing anything special in regards to its ESPN deal. But something tells me, since they just re-signed, that might carry on that.
They just resigned, so not going to be too worried about that. I will be interested in seeing what they're going to do with Bellator, because, as you kind of alluded to, if I'm a TV exec at any of these cable stations, I don't know if I'm picking up Bellator. If it might be better to just let ESPN and ESPN Plus do that. I don't know if UFC is going to invoke anything, but like I said, I think these circumstances are even more special when you consider the antitrust lawsuit that's going on. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this.
I think you could see Bellator on two different platforms. You could either see it on ESPN Plus or you could see it on Amazon Prime. But outside of those two, I don't see it being on ESPN linear unless the card is big enough to stack it, and then people will care. But it seems to me with the way they want to run Bellator, with it being solely international, I think it'll be more a streaming based promotion from here on out. But I could be wrong.
I mean, I did mention that last week about it. I mean, a couple of weeks ago about it potentially being ESPN Plus exclusive. Although we said, when the UFC has the summer cards, maybe ESPN 2 can air a Bellator card or whatnot. I think, like you said, it's going to be really interesting as we continue to go forward with all this. Zan, let's move over to the boxing front for a second. And then also considering what could be with Amazon Prime, considering they already have one championship. But like we said, we don't know what the future of one holds. So it'll be interesting to see all that on the MMA front. But Sam, moving over to boxing right now. WBC President Mauricio Sulamain told the media earlier this week that obviously we got the Anthony Joshua and Deontay Wilder both fighting on December 23rd. Anthony Joshua taking on Otto Wallin, Deontay Wilder taking on Joseph Parker in a battle of former heavyweight champions. And Mauricio Sulamain has kind of given the indication, as have others, about if Joshua and Wilder win, they could potentially meet up in 2024. About 7 years, a little too late. But the idea is that if that fight goes down, whoever wins that fight could be made a WBC mandatory to the winner of the undisputed title fight on February 17th between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk. And we already talked about Zan earlier, about a month or two ago, about the IBF basically saying that it wasn't going to accept a rematch between Fury and Usyk, and that if they didn't go after the IBF mandatory and they pursued the immediate rematch instead, that they would be stripped of the IBF title. So Zan, all I'm going to say for this one is this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that, but you could also say that there's a worst case scenario where the fight gets made, one guy gets hurt, and then it screws up the entire plan. So therefore, to me, it's like, okay, Sulaiman, if you really want to make the fight, just make the fight and don't put any extra caveats on it. Because could you imagine how tragic it would be if the winner of this fight was scheduled to fight Fury and then the fight never happened? The only people you could blame are the WBC themselves, and to be quite honest with you, they're the ones holding it up, not either or these guys. These guys want to fight. It's just a matter of where and when. To add all these extra caveats is why people in the boxing space are just getting sick and tired of just the theatrics, and I think this is just another one of these instances where they're just trying to suck as much money as they can out of it and delay the fight even longer, because I think we're going to be in a situation where it's the middle of 2024 and this exact fight that's on the screen right now will still not have happened, and we still won't know when it will happen or even if it will happen. So
right, we haven't seen it. We should have seen it 7 years ago and we never got it. We should have seen it 6 years ago and never got it. And then I'll be perfectly honest with you. All due respect to Deontay Wilder, I enjoy him. I enjoy his knockouts. Fury beat him twice, and some could arguably say the third time with the first fight. I don't know if I could agree with that, but Fury basically won the rivalry. I don't know if I have any interest, and we haven't seen Wilder do much since. I don't really have any interest in seeing a 4-fight between Fury and Wilder. Now, obviously, if Usyk wins, that changes things. But if Fury beats Usyk, and this fight somehow happens in 24 and Wilder wins it, I don't really have, I'll watch it, but I don't really have as much of a vested interest in that fight.
No, neither do I. But what would make a good case is if Usyk beats Fury and then it freshens up the whole division. Then you have so many. Then you have so many new fights you could potentially make. But if Fury wins, then you're back to the same old story all over again.
Actually, Zan, I could say the same thing in the case of Usyk with Joshua. If Usyk beats Fury and Joshua wins, I don't want to see Usyk Joshua 3. Usyk beat him twice.
Mm-hmm.
So you're risking a matchup that's old and just trying to make another fight when one fighter has clearly been better than the other. So I mean, we'll see how this plays out. Kind of like what you said. Let's see if Joshua versus Wilder actually happens in 24. Let's see if both of them get through
right,
their fights on December 23rd.
because right now, if there were betting odds for yes or no, I would bet no at plus 650 or would be not only would I bet no, I would bet it twice. That's how confident that's how confident I am that it won't happen.
This is a story that came up last week, Zan, that we didn't really get time to talk about. The PBC, so obviously they need a new home now that Showtime is wrapping up with its combat sports events. I think it's got one more Showtime boxing card this month, and then that's it. And I don't know if it's been finalized yet, but I know at least it's in the process of being finalized. You mentioned Amazon Prime before, and it seems like PBC is heading over there.
Yeah, I mean, this is the only real logical spot the PBC could go, considering that Matchroom is on DAZN and considering that ESPN now has Top Rank. So this is definitely a good spot for the PBC. It'll be interesting to see what fights they make. It'll be interesting to see if this is you have Amazon Prime and you get the PBC, or is it you have Amazon Prime and you got to buy certain PBC cards based on who is competing. It'll be interesting to see how the deal was structured. But given Amazon Prime and the way they do business now, and given that all you have to be is an Amazon Prime subscriber to watch the NFL, there would be no reason to believe why boxing would be any different. So overall, this is a great business decision for the PBC. They're strictly streaming now, and it caters to the younger generation like myself that streams everything. So now it'll be easier to even find the PBC, and I'm interested to see what fights they put on, and that leads me to even be more excited for the return of Andy Ruiz Jr., as he's one of my favorite fighters out of that promotion as well. So it'll be nice to see the PBC back on its regular schedule, and it'll be nice to see it be easily accessible. What do you think of it?
I mean, stinks for the older people who don't know how to do much streaming. I mean, Zan, at this point, and we've talked about the streaming is just, it's the future of broadcasting at this point. So, not really surprised PBC is going over to Amazon Prime. And like you said, a bunch of the streaming platforms now have their own boxing. The Zone has Eddie Hearn and Matchroom. ESPN has Top Rank. PBC and Amazon Prime now has the PBC. So, not surprised with the move. I just hope, they don't go to the Zone and ESPN Plus model and they do the pay-per-view format. I fear that that's what they're eventually going to do, that the bigger cards will be pay-per-view. But like you kind of said, considering the NFL is on Amazon Prime and you don't have to pay extra for that, I'm hoping that Amazon Prime doesn't do that as a means of trying to get, more customers and more eyeballs on the PBC product.
Me too, and I also hope that Amazon Prime does a good job of promoting the PBC in similar ways to which they promote the
That
NFL,
too.
which something tells me they will. So
Yeah, that's my hope as well. All right, let's get into the boxing and just the fights in general that's going to happen this weekend. Four things to talk about. Let's talk about some of the three bigger cards and then somebody that we know who's fighting this weekend. So all the main events. Let's start, Zan, with boxing. The WBC super lightweight title's on the line. You got Devin Haney moving up to 140 to challenge Regis Prograis for his title. Haney vacating all of his lightweight championships. And it seems like, Zan, at least to me, he has no more of an interest in competing at 135. This is a move to 140 that I guess is going to be for good.
yeah, it's going to be for good, and obviously Regis Prograis is no easy task, but something tells me that Devin Haney wants to put in a massive improvement, considering that he nearly lost to Vasily Lomachenko, and considering that this fight is in San Francisco, Haney trains out of Vegas. I think that the mini home slash close crowd advantage is gonna benefit him, and I think he's just gonna go out and do his thing and be the Devin Haney that people know him as. I mean, he's a super quick power puncher. He has nasty right hand. I think the longer the fight goes, the longer it favors Haney. The earlier or the shorter the fight is, I think it favors Prograis, very similar to what my opinion would have been had we covered Garcia versus Duarte. I could see this fight being awfully similar to that fight that took place this past weekend in Houston, Texas. And overall, I just think Devin Haney's the better boxer. Regis Prograis has a good resume, but if you look at the names that Haney is fought compared to Prograis. I don't think their resumes compare. So based on that, give me Haney to win in round 7 by TKO, but I think that Prograis gives Haney a good fight, tries to get him in deep water, but I just think he gets tired and he eventually gets finished. And overall, I think Haney's got his, sights set on bigger fights. Ryan Garcia's hinting that he might want him in the future. Raleigh Romero still out there in that division. He would probably like a super fight with Gervonta Tank Davis at some point. I think Devin Haney really wants to be the best lightweight fighter in the world, and one of his dreams is moving up to 147 eventually, and I think this is his path to doing so. And I think Prograis is just the next victim on that list. So give me Haney to win in 7 and get another dominant performance before he begins this next chapter of his career, which I think is going to be what is going to be how he's defined as a boxer by the time he retires in the next 10 to 15 years or so. So give me Haney.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Haney's got all the skills. I think Regis Prograis is going to be a tough fight, but as you mentioned, I think when it comes to the speed battle, I pick Haney. When it comes to the power battle, I pick Haney. When it goes to who I think is the better overall all-around boxer, I pick Haney. At this point, Zain, as you mentioned, Devin Haney is one of the faces of boxing at this point. And obviously he's coming off of that really controversial win over Vasily Lomachenko. But I think that Devin Haney, he's earned his keep. He's definitely one of the best in this sport. Give me him to win in 7 or 8 rounds with a finish, with a knockout. And I do think, does it stink that he's leaving lightweight? Yeah, because, there are some other fights that I have my eye on with him.
Well,
lightweight, with super lightweight.
The biggest one being the Lomachenko rematch, considering that there were still so many unanswered questions, considering how big the decision was, and now we might never see it.
You're right. You're absolutely right, and it stinks we might not get to see Haney Lomachenko too. But Zain, you mentioned welterweight and potentially 147. I'm just thinking to myself. I was afraid to say it, but now that you said it, I would love to see what could happen if Devin Haney went up to 147. The matchup with the superstars there, because welterweight is star-filled. That would be amazing.
Yeah, give it 3 years, and I really do think, given this new age of streaming that we're talking about, you could see all 3 streaming giants, Amazon Prime, ESPN, and DAZN, all come together to do a mega supercard where it's just the best at 147 competing against each other on one night. It would be the biggest boxing spectacle since the days of Mike Tyson. So I like where your head's going, but I would say give it a couple of years, and that might be a possibility.
Love it. On the UFC side of things, one last time this year, Zain. Apex. This card was supposed to be in China, but it was moved about a month ago to the Apex. Your main event, Song Yadong taking on Chris Gutierrez.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a high action-paced fight at bantamweight. These two are obviously super, super exciting contenders, but I just think that Song Yadong is on a different level. His last couple of fights have been the best I've ever seen him, and although Chris Gutierrez is a rising prospect that has a few really nice wins on his resume, he's never fought anybody like Yadong. He's never fought someone with the wrestling that Yadong has. He's never fought someone with the Muay Thai that Yadong has. And he's never fought someone with the gas tank that Yadong has. So for all those 3 reasons, give me Yadong with a 4th round stoppage. But I do think that Gutierrez will give Yadong the toughest fight that Yadong has ever had. So have this be a fight of the night contender and have this be just an absolute all war. But I think Yadong is simply just a little bit better and has more to prove, and wants a title shot in 2024, either mid to late next year. And this is just another one of those fights on his journey to it. So give me Yadong via 4th round TKO and an action-packed barn burner. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Gutierrez is going to give him a fight. I think that Gutierrez and Yadong are going to have basically a high octane back and forth action-filled, all-out combat kind of fight, back and forth with the striking. But as you mentioned, I think Yadong has him in the striking department. He has more experience. I think this is a little too much too soon for Gutierrez. I think he'll go to distance. I think he's tough enough for that. But I think this is going to be a clear decision win for Song Yadong.
Well said. And do you think that a win like this could propel Yadong, where if he wins 2 more fights, he's in a title conversation? Or do you think, in your opinion, he's already the, or then this is going to be the win that propels him to that opportunity, either as a short notice pullout or something like that? What do you think?
I mean, Song Yadong, as of the time we're recording this, Dan, is ranked number 7 in the UFC rankings, and Marlon Chita Vera is ranked number 6, and we're talking about him getting the title shot because of the history between him and O'Malley. If Yadong wins this fight, Stan, I think you gotta. Obviously, I don't think this is gonna be the fight that does it for him, but you gotta give him a top 5 guy. So if Song Yadong wins this fight, I'd like to see what he can do against Peter Young, against Henry Cejudo, against Aljo or Marab. I'd be very interested to see, as long as he wins this fight in pretty decisive fashion.
It would just be so disrespectful on the UFC's part, in my opinion, given the dominance that Marab has had for the last few years, is if they make him fight Yudong, and if he loses, is he never ends up getting a title shot. And I worry that, given the way that Cheeto Vera and O'Malley was made, that we could very well be going down that path. But I could be thinking 2 steps ahead of myself. But I just worry, given the way the UFC is in business the last few years, that could be the direction they're heading. What do you think?
It is a legitimate concern. But I especially considering that it seems like Dana has it out for Marab because Marab has said no to fighting Aljo because he and Aljo are good friends. That being said, O'Malley kind of is the path that if O'Malley beats Vera and Marab wins another fight, that obviously would open up the path that Marab could challenge O'Malley, which would be an interesting fight to see. Like you said, at this point, considering the UFC's history, we're gonna wait on bated breath to see what happens.
For sure.
Moving on right now over to the PFL, they got the European Championships. Unfortunately for US based people, it's not going to be streamed in the United States. Everywhere else, however, you will get this card. I believe it's going to be broadcasted on DAZN. The main event is going to be Nathan Kelly versus Demetrius Solmace, but you got 4 title fights. You got 4 title fights to mark off the end of their regular season playoffs. The co-main event, the last title fight, is going to be for the bantamweight title. Franz Malambo taking on Khurshid Kakarov. Franz Malambo is the sparring partner of Conor McGregor on a 7-fight winning streak. He has experience in the PFL. Zan, I don't know if you remember, but Combate, they did a one-night tournament in 2021, and Franz Malambo
I
was
do
the winner
remember
of
this.
that tournament. Franz
Mm-hmm.
Malambo was the winner of that tournament. He has experience in Brave. He's the former Brave. I'm sorry, no, he's not a former Brave champ, but he did compete in Brave. He competed in Bellator. He competed in Bama. So he's been around a bit. 15-5, training out of SBG Ireland, and then he's taken on Khurshid Kakarov, another guy who has Bellator experience. 7 of his 11, so he's 11-1, fighting out of Germany. 7 of his 11 wins are by knockout. He's a former bantamweight champion on the regional circuit. He's 2-0 on the PFL Europe right now. He's won both his fights against Mokhtar Benaki and Ali Talib. As far as Malambo goes, he's got back-to-back split decisions in his PFL tournament fights, defeating Richard Haas, Mokhtar Benkaksi. But yeah, given their experience, also Kakarov has fought with Brett Johns. He lost to Brett Johns, but he has fought with him. Brett Johns also competing on the PFL Europe card on Friday, December 8th. Look, I think Kakarov is a very dangerous fighter. Actually trains out of Extreme Couture. So you got SBG versus Extreme Couture. Height advantage goes to Malambo. Reach advantage goes to Malambo. I think Malambo is especially dangerous. I think they're both tough, so I think this one goes to a decision. I could see it being a split again, but I think it'll be competitive, but I will go towards Malambo, the Black Mamba, taking the PFL Bantamweight title, Europe Bantamweight title, with a decision win, and I could very well see, potentially, depending on how things play out, maybe we'll see Malambo on the global scene in next year's regular season for 2024.
Yeah, I was gonna say, once 2024 hits, I think a lot of these prospects that you're not necessarily prospects. These guys are obviously fighting for a title, but a lot of these, lesser known, European Series champions. I think once the merger is settled and done with, I think a lot of these guys like Malambo and like Kakarov are gonna be known to the general audience. So this could be almost like a prequel to what could be the preview or the flavor of what these European cards could look like. So it'll be interesting to see how this fight goes and how Malambo performs specifically, just given his ties to Conor McGregor. So based on that, I'm going to take Malambo too, but I think he finishes Kakarov. But again, I feel like this is one of those fights where it could go either way. Both of these guys have an outstanding pedigree. Obviously based on what you said, and of course, Malambo's experience also plays a factor. So I'm actually going to go with Malambo in the second round by TKO, but it's one of those fights again where you don't know until the fight happens, and these two guys definitely have some contrasting styles to where there's one guarantee, and that guarantee is that this fight will not be boring. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, none of these fights should be boring. If you get a chance to check out the PFL Europe card on Friday, it should be absolutely excellent. John Mitchell, Jacob Kasuba in another title fight. Brett Johns is competing. You got Nathan Kelly in the main event, and then you have Nate Kelly earlier in the card on the amateur circuit, part of the one of the earlier fights. The second Nate Kelly that I mentioned earned a little notoriety several years ago, telling Dana White at a press conference, "I'm going to be an MMA fighter one day," as he was showing all his support for his country's own Conor McGregor.
It's a pretty crazy story, and that's what happens when you get on social media at a young age. Sometimes good things happen, and now Nate Kelly is realizing that exact dream. So congratulations to him.
And training at SBG Ireland, along with Franz Malambo, John Kavanagh, and Conor McGregor.
It's pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing here, Zan. Shout out to Losene Keita. He's returning at Octagon 50. Obviously, he got injured in his last fight. All that anticipation for that fight ends with an injury, but he's coming back. Vacant featherweight title on the line. He's going after it. He's taking on Nikos Semenides.
Yeah, obviously, as you know, well, given my relationship with him, I'm very excited for this. This is just one of those fights where I'm going to be nervous because, as we alluded to with this fight with Santa Kitse, we were kind of going into it. We were kind of going into it thinking that the winner of that fight was going to advance into their careers and potentially, get signed to the UFC. That obviously didn't happen. So, we're going to see if Losene Keita is fully healthy, but assuming he is, I think it should be an action-packed fight. Samasai is not lost in about 2 years or so, so that's something to be wary of. He's won 10 fights in his career so far, but to me, based on the brief research that I've done, I think that Keita's Muay Thai is going to be too much, and I think he actually gets a third round finish and looks the best he's ever looked and shows whatever promotion wants him. Can have him. So I'm hoping he does well. I am picking him to win, and it'll be interesting to see. I think if he's fully healthy, I think he's one of the best unsigned prospects that we've seen in this division in quite some time, and I hope he proves at Octagon 50, considering that Octagon has really built him up. I think he's a big star over there, and I think he's a starter that they like to take care of, and this is one of these showcase fights that he has to win. He's headlining the card, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, shout out to Losene. He's definitely given time to us on the MMA Outsiders before. Good luck to him. Hoping to see if he can, hold up the featherweight championship at the end of Octagon 50, a big card for Octagon MMA this weekend. So a lot of big stuff going on this weekend, and then of course next week, Sam, is going to be even more packed. Before we do, let's wrap things up here. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Make sure to follow us across social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, at MMA Outsiders ETB. Follow the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at ETV Network. Once again, to my right, as always, you have Zan Bando, my love co-host as always. Follow his work over at bjpen.com and MMA Knockout. Follow him on social media at Bando99. I'm Tom Albano. You can find my work over at MMA News, Fanside MMA. I'll be on the call on the PFL website. Check out the results page, especially if you can't watch, for all the latest from PFL Europe, the championships card. And then you can find my work over at social media at Thomas J. Albano. Make sure to listen to us, take MMA Outsiders on the road with you with Acast and our other audio-only streaming platforms. If you are listening on those platforms, we thank you so much. And we encourage you to go to youtube.com/EFT Network, which is our YouTube home, our main base, if you will. Hit the subscribe button. We're climbing up towards 650 subscribers. We thank you all for your support. Make sure to go to etvpodcast.com for more information about the network, as well as, blogs from some of our contributors. Next week, Zain, second to last episode of the year. We got a Jake Paul fight we got to discuss. We got UFC 296 to discuss. We'll discuss all the recaps from this weekend in combat. Should be a fun time. Beat Joe Pyfer. Congratulations to Joe Pyfer, by the way, getting his first UFC main event come February.
Huge, huge, huge congratulations, Tim, and thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the MMA Outsiders. We can do this without any views, so stay tuned for more content on the way, and stay tuned for the impending UFC 296 preview that will be all the bells and whistles of next week's episode. So for Tom, I'm Zain. We'll see you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and we will see you soon.